Dust swept low across the dirt road, like a whisper too tired to scream. Drebone Hollow sat motionless beneath the bruised sky, the late sun bleeding gold over the warped rooftops and leaning hitching posts. Nothing about the place moved fast anymore. Not since the sheriff's badge had been buried under a crooked cross at the Hilltop Chapel. Around here, justice came late, if it came at all, and the dead stayed exactly where they fell. The townsfolk knew to keep their eyes down and their mouths shut. Trouble came often now, riding in from the canyons, grinning wide with rot-stained teeth, and carrying fire in their saddlebags. The Claymouth boys. 5 of them, or maybe 6, no one could keep track. They took what they wanted, burned what they couldn't carry, and didn't seem much concerned with living long lives. That's the kind of freedom that made them dangerous. So when the stranger rode in under that harsh twilight, folk noticed. He didn't ride proud or fast. His horse was plain, the color of ash. His coat, long and battered, hung loose around a lean frame. One leg stiffened with every step his boot touched down, like an old wound never quite set right. His hat hung low, casting his face in shadow. Even from behind the cracked window panes and saloon shutters, whispers began. He ain't from here. No one greeted him. He tied his horse outside the livery stable and walked slow, limping but steady. He passed the sheriff's office, door boarded, badge gone, and the church, its steeple half collapsed. When he reached the general store, he paused, looked up. A woman stood on the porch with a broom in her hand, her hair pinned tight, and her eyes sharp beneath the weariness. She nodded, cautious. He didn't nod back, just pushed through the swinging door and disappeared inside. Clara Morrow didn't trust men who didn't return a nod, but she didn't sound the alarm either. There was something in the way he moved, controlled, watchful, like a man who knew how loud his own footsteps were. Inside, he bought a tin of coffee, 2 boxes of shells, and a bar of soap. Paid in silver. No words beyond the price. Then he walked out and into the dimming street, the breeze lifting a sheet of newspaper like a specter across his path. The boy came running not long after that. Small, maybe 9 or 10, with bare feet and bruises up both arms. He sprinted from behind the saloon, stumbling, eyes wide. Behind him, a drunk staggered, wide belt, pistol swinging, fury boiling over with each unsteady lurch. You little rat, I'll break your goddamn legs. People froze. No one moved. Not the barkeep watching from the door. Not the card players through the window. Even Clara tensed on her porch, hand halfway to the doorframe. The boy tripped, fell hard, palm scraping raw against the dirt. The stranger was already moving. He didn't run. He stepped off the wooden walkway, let the wind tug at his coat, and drew his pistol in a motion so fluid it felt like a trick of light. The gun barked once, sharp, clean. The drunk's hand exploded in red and steel, his pistol clattering to the ground as he screamed and dropped to his knees. The boy scurried backward, tears smearing the dust on his cheeks. The stranger didn't look at him, didn't look at the bleeding man, just holstered his weapon and turned back toward the livery. Clara hadn't realized she'd moved until she found herself at the edge of her steps. She called out, not loudly, "You didn't kill him." The stranger paused mid-stride, looked over his shoulder. His face, now lit by the setting sun, showed lines etched by firelight and silence. Gray stubble along his jaw. Eyes not empty, but full of something worse. "No need," he said. Then he walked on. The boy crawled toward Clara. She crouched and pulled him in, whispering soft, steady words. Her eyes, though, stayed on the path the stranger had taken, until he disappeared into the loft above the stable. That night, the wind changed. The smell of smoke drifted faintly from the south ridge. Coyotes howled, distant and restless. Clara locked the doors, closed the shutters, kissed her son's forehead twice before blowing out the lantern. She lay in bed long after midnight, staring at the ceiling boards. The knock came just before dawn. Not a loud one, just enough to snap her from a drifting dream. She slipped from bed, stepped lightly, reached for the shotgun hanging behind the door. Through the narrow crack of the wood, no one stood on the porch. She opened it anyway. A scrap of paper fluttered at her feet, pinned by a rusted nail. She picked it up with shaking fingers, breath shallow as a prayer. The words were jagged, rushed. "We come for you next. CB." Her blood ran cold. Her knuckles whitened around the shotgun. Somewhere across the street, a window creaked open. Someone had seen. No one would say. She didn't scream. Didn't cry. She turned back inside, closed the door gently behind her, and lit the lamp. Upstairs in the livery loft, the stranger sat with his back against the wall, his pistol laid across his lap. He was already awake. The ladder to the loft creaked under Clara's weight. She climbed with one hand steadying a tin mug, the other gripping a small oil lantern. Morning mist curled around the eaves of the livery, and the scent of horse sweat and hay hung thick in the cool air. Above, the sound of slow, deliberate breathing marked his presence, awake, waiting. Ash sat cross-legged on a rough wool blanket, pistol beside him, boots off, coat folded neatly behind. The rifle leaned against a beam within reach. He didn't look up when she arrived, only shifted slightly, acknowledging her with the faintest tilt of his head. "I brought coffee," she said, holding the mug out like an offering. He took it in both hands. "Appreciated." She set the lantern on a crate and settled across from him, skirts gathered to keep off the straw. Silence stretched between them like an old rope, frayed but unbroken. Outside, a rooster crowed once, then fell quiet. "What's your name?" she asked. He sipped the coffee, grimaced slightly. "Call me Ash." "Short for something?" He didn't answer. She nodded. "Fair enough." Ash drank again. Clara studied him, saw the weathered lines around his eyes, the way his shoulders never fully relaxed. He looked like a man carved from old stone, hardened by wind, worn by time. "My boy used to talk," she said quietly. That got his attention. Ash's eyes lifted to meet hers. She saw no cruelty there, just something heavy and buried deep, like bones under sand. "Used to chatter all day. About bees and dirt and why the moon follows the sun. Then they came." Her voice didn't crack. "Clay Mouth and his men. They burned the barn first. Shot my husband in the back while he tried to keep him outside. Sam saw it happen. He was 5. Ash's jaw tightened. "They didn't even take anything worth having. Just made sure we knew we didn't own our land, or our fear, or even the right to bury our dead slow." She drew in a shaky breath, steadied it. "Sam hasn't said a word in 2 years. Not since the night we crawled out the root cellar and saw what was left." Ash looked down at the mug in his hands. The coffee had gone cold. "I know who they are," he said. "I figured," she replied. "You got the look of a man who keeps a list." The silence that followed was softer. Clara leaned forward, eyes locked with his. "I ain't here to cry on your boots, Ash. I came to ask you something." He waited. "If you won't kill them, teach me how to fight. Teach me how to shoot like you do. How to track. I got a boy to raise. And if they come again, I won't be crawling nowhere." Ash didn't answer right away. He studied her, really studied her, and what he saw must have caught him off guard. She wasn't trembling, wasn't pretending. Her grief had dried into iron. "You ever held a knife?" he asked. She nodded. "Gutted hogs since I was 12. He almost smiled, but didn't. "All right," he said. "We start tonight. After dark." Clara left without another word. The rooster crowed again. The sun began to rise behind the chapel cross, broken but still standing. They trained in secret, always after dusk, behind the barn where the cornstalks no longer grew, in the shadow of a grove that hadn't seen rain in months. Ash taught with few words, mostly gestures and patience. He showed her how to hold the knife, not by its handle, but by understanding weight and intention. He corrected her grip on the revolver, guiding her fingers until the weapon became a part of her hand, not a foreign thing. Tracking came last. He showed her the signs in the dirt, how a broken stem meant a limp, how disturbed rocks could whisper direction. Clara learned fast. Hard living made her quick. There were nights she cursed, bled from split knuckles, and got back up before he could offer help. Other times, they sat in the dark together, saying nothing, just listening to the wind scrape over the land. He asked her once why she hadn't left. She replied, "You ever been poor with a child and nowhere to go? This land's bad, sure, but it's ours. I got my name buried under that cottonwood out back. I ain't letting them dig it up. Ash understood that. More than he admitted. He began to watch her differently. Not as a student, not even as a widow, but as someone who hadn't quit when every reason said she should have. Someone who, in another life, he might have found before the fire and the blood. One night, as the moon broke through ragged clouds, Clara handed him a folded handkerchief. Inside was a silver locket. Ash opened it. Inside, a tiny charcoal sketch. A man with kind eyes. Her husband, drawn by a preacher's daughter after the funeral. I want you to hold on to it, she said. I didn't know him. You didn't know me either. Now you do. Ash stared at the locket longer than he meant to. When he tried to give it back, she shook her head. That boy of mine still don't speak, but he watches you like a hawk. Saw you take down that drunk without blinking. If you walk away now, you'll break him worse than they ever did. His throat fell dry. I ain't askin you to kill nobody, Ash. Just help me finish what they started. Protect what little's left. He hesitated, then asked, What happens after? Clara stepped closer, voice low. You help me end this, and I'll give you something you ain't had in a long while. A place. A family. A reason to breathe again. The words landed like a stone in a well, deep, echoing. Ash turned his face away. Looked toward the canyon, where the wind carried ash and bad memories alike. I ain't that mad anymore. Maybe not, but he's still in there somewhere. She touched his arm, just once. Not soft, not pleading. Then she walked back toward the house, lantern swinging gently at her side. Ash stood alone for a long time, the locket warm in his palm. He almost left that night. Saddled the horse. Packed what little he had. Watched the road west stretch into silence. But he didn't. When morning came, Clara opened her back door and found a tin mug on her porch, still steaming. Next to it, a single word carved into the wood rail with a knife. They came in at full gallop, hooves pounding like war drums across the dry earth. Dust rose in a fevered swirl behind them, cloaking the horizon in a burnt haze. 6 men, maybe 7. It was always hard to count when death rode fast and close. At the front, reins loose and grin wide, was Jed Claymouth. He sat the saddle like a king born to ruin, a black duster whipping at his sides, and a jagged scar carving down the left half of his jaw. He rode with a shotgun across his lap and a devil's light in his eyes. The townsfolk scattered before the Claymouth boys even reached Main Street. Doors slammed, windows darkened, and voices fell silent. Drebone Hollow had learned to play dead when the jackals came sniffing. Clara was in the back room of the store, sorting grain sacks, when she heard the first shot crack through the air. It wasn't aimed at anyone, just a greeting, a reminder. Ash stepped out from the livery loft's shadow, rifle slung but not raised, face still and unreadable. He stood between 2 buildings, nearly hidden, but his eyes didn't blink once. He watched Jed dismount in front of the general store, spurs clinking with every step. Miss Morrow, Jed called out, sing-song and venom-slick. You keepin' our town tidy, I hope? She didn't answer, didn't move. Thought I'd stop in for supplies. Maybe see if that boy of yours still remembers how to scream. Ash moved before he realized he'd moved, 2 steps forward, hand twitching toward the revolver on his hip. Then he stopped cold. Jed turned slightly, and for a flash of a second, their eyes met. It was like staring into a fire he thought he'd outrun. Ash's hand trembled, barely noticeable, but real. Not from fear, from recognition. The scar, the voice, the way Jed moved, careless and calculating. It pulled something sharp from the cellar of Ash's mind, something he'd buried beneath layers of silence and whiskey and years. Jed Claymouth. He'd had another name once. Jed Tucker. One of the men Ash had chased across 3 territories. One of the outlaws he'd promised to take in alive. The man who'd made him break that promise. Ash staggered backward into shadow, breath shallow. Inside the store, Clara's jaw clenched as Jed stepped through the door. She didn't give him the pleasure of fear. He looked around, feigned surprise. Well now, neat as a church. Shame, really. He reached into a barrel of flour, lifted a handful, let it fall like snow to the floor. Outside, one of the boys laughed and lit a torch. Ash saw the flicker. By the time he got to the door, the front of the store was already in flames. Clara burst out the back, coughing, clutching her son to her chest. Smoke billowed behind her as the roof groaned and cracked. Ash grabbed her arm, pulled them both down the alley and into cover. The boy shook, eyes glassy, face streaked with ash and tears. In his hand was a scorched, headless doll. They watched the building crumble from behind the chapel. Ash didn't speak, didn't blink. Clara turned to him, voice like flint striking steel. You knew him. He didn't deny it. What is he to you? Ash stared at the fire. A ghost. Later, when the flames had gone out and the Claymouth boys rode back to their canyon hideout, Clara found Ash alone behind the barn. He sat on a broken crate, hat on his knee, eyes lost in something far away. She sat beside him, waited. He handed her a name, without turning his head. Ash Hartley. She froze. I was a Pinkerton man. Back when law still felt like something you could hold in your hand and believe in. Track bad men across worse country. Thought if I brought him in alive, maybe I'd save a little of myself in the process. He let the silence speak for a moment. They found me once. Burned the house. Wife didn't make it. My boy was 2. He was in the crib. Ash swallowed hard. I made it back in time to hear him cry. Just once. Clara didn't speak. They weren't supposed to know where I lived. I did everything right. But one of them, he smiled as he rode off. Scar across his face. Left me that smile like it was a signature. Clara's voice, when it came, was hushed but fierce. Jed Claymouth. Ash nodded. Different name then. Same soul. So you disappeared. He looked at her finally. After the burial, I resigned. Went west. Changed everything. Let the man I was die beside them. I ain't touched a badge since. Clara took a breath, let it out slow. You're not just good with a gun. You were one of the best. I was the best, he said, not proud. And it didn't matter. She stood then, her anger quiet and burning. Then why are you still here, Ash? He didn't answer. She stepped closer. You could have ridden on. I've seen men like you vanish without a word. But you didn't. Why? Ash looked down at his hands. They were shaking again. I don't know, he whispered. I do, she said. Because there's still a piece of that man left inside you. The one who cared if people lived. The one who buried his family and didn't become a monster. Ash looked up. Clara's eyes weren't wet. They were steady. Fierce. You want to stay in the shadows, fine. But my son just watched the last of his safety burn to the ground. If you're not here to help stop this, then I need to know now, because I will. Her voice cracked then, just a little. I will do it without you if I have to. But I'd rather not. Ash stood slowly. His legs felt heavy, like they'd sunk into the dirt. I swore I wouldn't be that man again, he said. Clara didn't blink. Then be a better one. A wind picked up from the canyon, carrying the scent of char and soot. The town was quiet again, hiding behind closed shutters and smothered prayers. Ash looked out toward the horizon, where the Claymouth boys had disappeared. Somewhere out there was the man who destroyed everything Ash had once loved. And now he was circling again, lighting fires where there was still something left to burn. He turned back to Clara, voice low. Tomorrow night, we go hunting. The morning light bled red across Trebone Hollow. Smoke curled from the blackened skeleton of the chapel, drifting in lazy plumes into a sky that seemed unsure whether to burn or break open. Ash rode fast into the ruin, wind tugging at his coat, rifle slung across his back, breath taut as wire. The silence was wrong. It wasn't the quiet of peace. It was the hush of something taken. The general store was gone. The forge twisted into ash. The windmill leaned like a wounded man. And at the edge of it all, in the shadow of the well, stood Clara's boy. Dust streaked his face, arms wrapped around himself, like he might disappear if he let go. When Ash dismounted, the boy stepped forward without a word and held out his hand. In his palm lay Clara's locket. Ash took it with a breath that caught halfway through his ribs. The clasp was broken. The chain burned black at one end. She set a trap. Came a voice behind him. Old Hank, one of the few left still walking. They came to collect taxes. She lured two of them into the cellar and set it off. Took a few with her. But Jed got her. Took her west. Toward the rocks. Ash didn't speak. He just turned, saddled his gear, and rode. The canyon swallowed him. Red stone towered high on either side, cutting off the sun and muffling every sound like the world was holding its breath. He dismounted where the trail narrowed, following the hoofprints on foot, boots crunching through dust and broken shale. A buzzard circled overhead. Somewhere far off, a wolf cried out, thin and lonely. Each step echoed with the weight of memory, burning timbers, a baby's final cry, the bitter taste of helplessness. He pressed on. The wind scraped across the cliff walls like whispers, but the path was clear. Broken branches, scorched brush, blood still wet on a stone. And then voices. Ash crept along a narrow ledge and dropped low, peering over the rim of a gorge cut deep into the earth like a wound. Below, in a basin of sun-baked stone, the Claymouth boys made camp. Horses were tied off at the far end, and 3 men sat near a dying fire, passing around a bottle. 2 more stood guard near a cluster of rocks, where Clara was bound to a post, hands tied tight, face bruised, blood at her temple. Jed stood apart from them all, 1 foot on a boulder, watching the sky like it owed him something. Ash didn't hesitate. The first shot came silent and clean, his rifle dropping the nearest guard with a single crack to the shoulder. The second man spun, shouting, but Ash was already moving, slipping between stone like smoke, reloading on the run. Chaos erupted. Gunfire screamed through the gorge, echoing off the cliffs. 1 outlaw dropped his weapon and bolted, only to be slammed flat by the butt of Ash's rifle. Another drew fast, but Ash was faster, shot to the leg, then the arm. No kill shots, just ruin, precise and relentless. Jed grabbed Clara, knife to her throat, dragging her backward toward a narrow outcrop. Ash stepped into the open. Easy now. Jed snarled, blade pressed tight against her skin. 1 twitch and she don't make it. Clara's eyes found Ash's across the dust and blood and fire. They didn't plead. They didn't beg. They just locked on his, steady as they'd always been. Ash raised his revolver, 1 hand slow. Jed's lip curled. She's not worth it, he sneered. Ain't nobody worth dying for anymore. Clara's voice rang out, rough but clear. He won't shoot. He's not like you. Jed chuckled darkly. Then he's dead. Ash's finger tightened. Jed shifted his stance, barely. But enough. Clara's breath caught, and then she whispered, voice breaking for the first time, just loud enough to carry through the dust. Please don't shoot. I'll give you a family if you let me live. Ash froze. The wind paused with him. The gorge fell silent. Her words hit like a bullet to the soul. He saw her there, not just as she was now, bound and battered, but as she'd been in firelight, teaching her boy how to set snares. In the barn, sleeves rolled, fists bloodied from training. On the porch, sipping coffee, eyes closed to the sunrise. And beside her, a space that hadn't existed for anyone in a long time. A space waiting for him. His gun trembled. Jed sneered. Come on, lawman. End it. Ash's breath steadied. His eyes narrowed. He shifted his aim and fired. The bullet shattered Jed's hand. The knife clattered to the ground. Clara stumbled free as Jed screamed, cradling the ruined limb. Ash closed the distance in 3 strides, kicked the blade away, and leveled his gun. Jed's eyes gleamed through the pain. Should have killed me when you had the chance. Ash stared at him, revolver firm in his grip. No, he said. That's the man I used to be. Behind him, Clara untied her hands. Her son had crept in from the rocks, trembling but brave, wide eyes locked on Ash. Ash holstered his gun. You'll face trial, he said to Jed. This time, you answer for it. Jed spat blood onto the dust. You think they'll hang me? Ash didn't answer. By dusk, the Claymouth boys were either dead, wounded, or bound to their saddles. Ash rode beside Clara, her boy clinging to her waist. The path home was long and quiet, but something had shifted in the silence. As they passed the burned remains of the store, the boy spoke. His voice was hoarse and used. Ash! Ash turned. The boy smiled. Behind them, the gorge grew distant. Ahead, The sun dipped low and gold over Drebone Hollow. And for the first time in years, Ash Hartley breathed deep and didn't feel hollow. Long after the dust settled, after the Claymouth boys were carted away in irons or buried beneath unmarked stone, he remained in Drebone Hollow. Not because he was asked to, and not because he had nowhere else to go. He stayed because something in him, something brittle and long dormant, began to root in the silence that followed. The store was rebuilt first. Clara refused to let the burned bones of it become a monument to fear. Ash helped, though he never said much about it. He measured boards, hammered quietly, and whittled the new sign by hand. Clara's son sat beside him most days, legs dangling from the porch, watching his every movement with wide, curious eyes. It was on one of those slow afternoons, with the hammer resting idle and the wind gentle for once, that the boy looked up and spoke. Ash. Just that. One word. But it carried the weight of 2 silent years, of sleepless nights and firelit terror. Ash looked over, heart suddenly still. The boy smiled. From that day on, he followed Ash like a shadow. They planted corn together in the back field, soil soft and hopeful beneath their hands. Ash taught him how to tie knots, how to track rabbits, how to shoot tin cans lined up on fence posts. They never spoke of the night in the gorge, or the fire, or the locket. They didn't have to. Some wounds healed best in the doing, not the saying. Clara watched from the porch most evenings, arms folded, a quiet pride in her gaze. She never asked Ash when, or if, he meant to leave. She never had to. The townsfolk, once wary, began to nod at him in passing, then speak, then stay a while. A rocking chair appeared on the porch outside the church. A crate of apples left near the livery. The hollow had always been a place where silence outlived conversation, but slowly, gently, it found its voice again. People didn't talk much about what Ash had done. They talked about what he hadn't. They said he had Claymouth dead to rights. Said the man who burned their town, who bled their neighbors, should have been left for the buzzards. But Ash didn't raise his gun for vengeance. He spared the man who had taken everything from him, and by doing so, took something back. That, they said, was the kind of man worth remembering. Ash carved a swing for the boy and hung it from the cottonwood behind the house. He built birdhouses and fixed shutters that didn't belong to him. Once, on a quiet Sunday, Clara pulled a dusty fiddle from under her bed and began to play. Ash sat on the porch step, eyes closed, and let the sound wash over him like water through dry stone. He hadn't listened to music in years. At night, he slept without his boots on. The rifle stayed leaned against the wall, untouched. Summer came, and with it the scent of sun-warmed hay and rain on old wood. Children returned to the schoolhouse. Folks planted more than just beans and barley. They planted orchards, dreams, stories. And somehow, Ash Hartley, the man who once rode into town like a shadow, became part of the tale. Not a legend, not a hero, just a man who stayed. One evening, as the sun dipped gold behind the ridge and painted everything with the warm hush of peace, Ash sat on the porch, whittling a figure from cedar. The boy lay sprawled in the grass nearby, drawing in the dirt with a stick. Clara came out with 2 cups of coffee and settled beside Ash without a word. They sat in silence for a while, the kind that doesn't press or strain, the kind built over time and truth and healing. Clara took a slow sip, then glanced at his hands. You still got that shaking in your hand. Ash looked down at the blade in his fingers, the smooth curls of wood falling in quiet spirals to the floorboards. He smiled faintly. Not today. The wind stirred the leaves above them. Somewhere, a bird called out once, sharp and sweet. Years later, when strangers passed through Drebone Hollow and asked about the man who lived with the widow and her boy, the townsfolk would lean in close and tell them the story. Not the gunfights, not the blood, but the quiet after, the rebuilding, the man who carved swings instead of crosses. They say he was the last man who could have killed and didn't. They'd whisper, and that maybe, just maybe, that's what made him the most dangerous of them all. And on that porch, beneath a cottonwood tree that remembered everything, Ash Hartley stayed.